Hello and welcome back to part 2 of my exploration of how to work with inner aspects, the fragmentation, recovery arc to integration, which would apply to people who are experiencing maybe certain mental illness diagnoses like borderline personality disorder, dissociative identity disorder, or perhaps you're just wanting to work with your inner children or inner aspects. So if you haven't watched part 1, please do, just to give you some context. In this part, what I wanted to do was explore some of the tools and ways that you can actually work with the parts. So once you become aware that you have different aspects, and that might be through your own what's called co-consciousness, so understanding or recognizing different aspects of yourself at different times, or in cases of dissociative identity disorder, where there's a memory or an amnesia barrier between the different parts, so you'll perhaps lose time or not remember that you were out doing something, or you might come home and realize you bought something that you don't remember buying, or there's a spectrum there from what's called co-consciousness, where you're conscious of all the parts, all the way through to complete amnesia, forgetting. So if you're at the end of the amnesia spectrum, you may well become conscious of your parts when you first start working in therapy, and these parts might be presented to you by the person that you're working with, or it might be loved ones close to you that identify different types of behavior. It's a very confusing time for many, and I guess I'm not going to touch on it too much here, even though I feel like it needs a lot of unpacking in and of itself, because it's such a full-on time when you're beginning to realize that maybe you do have different aspects that are kind of taking over at certain times. But right now the focus of this video is more broad, so to help anyone who's working with the inner child or inner aspects. So I'll focus more on that today, and then maybe at some point discuss other aspects of the DID journey. So the first thing I thought I would do was set up a really good analogy that can help you understand how to approach this work, and that is to see your psyche, your psychology, your mind as a house. And most people are familiar with the feeling of having a home and presenting, when you have a guest, presenting your living room and your hallway and the bathroom and maybe any areas that the guests are going to come to. Like, you present them really well, and you're very familiar with those places, and that's the identity that you're showing the world. So you think of those rooms, the lounge room, the living area, the hallway, as the parts that you show the world and the parts that you're conscious of. So that's all well and good, but we also, if the personality is a house, we might have a lot of rooms that we keep hidden, that we, most of us have got a spare room somewhere. Like, if we're lucky enough to have more than one room or live in a bigger place, we'll have a spare room or a garage or some kind of junk room where all the rubbish gets put, all those unmade projects or things you don't know what to do with. So there's those kinds of rooms that you wouldn't want your visitors to go into. So you can liken those rooms to aspects of yourself where you know that you have some stuff to deal with, the shadow that I was talking about in part 1, but you're not really wanting to do it. Like, those junk rooms are a bit tedious, aren't they? Let's face it, we don't really want to go in them. We know there's a heap of sorting out to do, and it's all a bit painful. So that's the kind of the shadow that maybe you're aware of, is like that spare room, that junk room. And then there's more parts that maybe are hidden from you initially. So they might be attics, let's say, just to use the analogy of an attic, a space where you would never, sorry, I think that was my chicken. a space that you wouldn't normally go into and is out of sight, out of mind. Another analogy would be the basement, or it may even be, if you want to push this analogy, like secret underground tunnels to rooms that you don't know exist, or rooms that are hidden behind walls, or you can get kind of magical thinking about this. Now, imagine that each of those rooms was an aspect of yourself. So the living rooms, the living areas contain those aspects of self that you're familiar with, that you present to the world. It might be yourself as a professional worker, or might be your role as a, if you're in a relationship, your role as a spouse, or if you've got children, it might be your role as a mother or a father, or it might be the attributes that you are aware of and own, if you like. So maybe there's an activist in you, or there's an artistic part that gets expression. So those parts will be on view in those front rooms, so to speak. Now, on this journey, as we become aware of the other aspects, it's kind of like opening up rooms in the house that haven't been opened, and either for a long time, or you didn't even know they existed. So imagine that other aspects of your personality live in those rooms. So you've got, maybe living down the back of the house somewhere and behind a door that's been locked for 20 years, some of these parts of you, these wounded, or that they're always wounded in a sense, because they wouldn't be hidden from view if there wasn't carrying some sort of a wound. So, or at least if they're a positive aspect, maybe you're the one that's wounded, but there's a wound associated with the fact that they're hidden. So it's going to be painful and maybe really quite frightening to push open those doors. First of all, to find the keys, and that's what the awareness is about finding the keys to that, whether you're working with a therapist or you're doing some kind of journaling, or just self-reflection, becoming conscious of what you're doing during the day, what your thoughts are. Oh, okay, there seems to be this voice that, is this inner voice that keeps chastising me. I wonder if that's a part, that kind of inner reflection. So those are your keys, and they'll get you into the rooms. And then in there, now let's say we're working with, a very small, shamed child part of you. So the wounded child, the archetypal wounded child, the child that was perhaps punished for having needs or feelings that maybe its parents couldn't work with or deal with. So those things were shut away. So when you first open that door, what you see in there is likely to be very confronting, seeing an aspect of yourself that you've buried for so long. And just like in this imaginative analogy, if that really was a child and it had been literally neglected for 20 years, 30 years, 10 years, whatever it is, however old you are, can you imagine what kind of a state that child would be in? Terrified, not trusting anybody, deeply shamed. So if shame is the aspect we're working with, and probably quite hostile to you, and your aware self, that you're, as if that part of you is standing at the door looking at this child, might also be hostile towards that child. Maybe you don't really want to open that door and look at this little being that all of a sudden you're responsible for. And it can be a tough time, because in a way it feels not fair that you are responsible for those little parts of yourself. Once maybe a long time ago, someone else should have taken care of them for you, the people that loved you and were your family. But given that really is an idealistic situation, it certainly isn't the case for so many of us. What do we do now in this moment when we're facing that little child? And this is the work that I'm going to kind of present to you in this video, some ideas on how to approach these parts and make friends with them. So I like this analogy because I would imagine, I'm not a foster parent, I've never taken in a foster child, but I have fostered animals, and I can, draw on that experience to know how mistrustful that relationship is at first, and how much work it takes to persuade that little being that you're there to help it, and even harder if you yourself are not really feeling too sure that you're up to that task. So it's kind of been thrown into the responsibility maybe that you don't want. So if you were in that situation with a child, it would take many months. I recently fostered 2 little cats, and it took a good 6 months before those cats were felt really safe with me, and were kind of climbing into my bed and snuggling up to me and so forth. So similarly, this is just going to take a lot of time, and you're going to have to go into that room again and again and again to sit and be with this part of yourself. Now, initially, it's just about awareness. It's about knowing that the part is in the room. It's about making contact, saying hi, communicating with that part. If you're a creative person, you'll probably find this relatively easy. Like, you'll come up with some ideas of your own that will be really creative. But not, some people do struggle. So with that kind of thought, like even this analogy I'm presenting might be a bit, I don't know if this is working for me. So if it's not working for you, scrap it. That's okay. Find something that is. Hopefully one of these tools will be helpful. So the tools are, firstly, things like journaling. Now, this came really instinctively to me because I love to write. And I've kept diaries for much of my life. So you can write to this part. You can speak to this part. You can say, "Dear shame child, I know you're there, and I know you're hurting, and I don't know how to solve your problems yet, but I'm going to work on it, so bear with me, maybe we can be friends." Something like that, right? So you make this step, this communication, and writing it down is a little bit more powerful than just thinking it in your head. It kind of materializes it into form, which is powerful for your memory as well. It's like a memory activation. You kind of embed it in your experiences when you can actually see it. So you can journal to the child or the part. It might not be a child, it might be an adult part of you that is hostile or for some reason has been exiled from your experience. You can also request that part write to you. So left or alternate handwriting is a powerful way of doing this. So using your non-dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you use your left hand and write to yourself from the child using your left hand. The writing itself in your non-dominant hand will look quite childish. So that can, again, it can kind of activate the memories and the feelings that will come. And you might be really surprised just how potent this little exercise is. Just asking a simple little question of that child aspect, like, how are you feeling? And you'll probably get quite an honest answer. Hurt, abandoned, alone. You might get drawings of tears or sad faces, or depends on how old the child part is and how it's going to express itself. Trust whatever comes up. I really encourage you, especially in these early stages, to allow this to come out of yourself, and don't censor it by saying, "Oh, this is stupid," or that a child wouldn't say that, or I don't know. There's so many reasons why the mind will try to defend you from exploring this process, because it wasn't safe years ago for these parts to come out, so it's not going to feel safe. Don't expect it to feel safe, but if you can just be brave enough to kind of hold enough space to feel through that fear anyway, and to just give some expression to these childish aspects, you will gradually take the emotional charge that's around this process away. You'll start to feel safer with it. The emotional charge will be fear, probably. It's a fearful, painful thing to do. Initially, it does get better. But in saying that as well, I think it's important to get support around this kind of work. So it depends, how severe the issue is for you, and your own coping skills and where you're at in your recovery, and it depends on a whole bunch of things. So there's no way for me to tell you what to do. It's only you can know that. But you tune into your inner guidance. Like if you're starting this work and let's say you're journaling to yourself and you write something down and you feel really triggered by that, just feel into this. Like, is this okay for me to continue? Is this going to benefit me right now? Or do I need to just put this exercise aside and, curl up and have a cry, or contact my therapist if you work with a therapist, or contact a support person, or go for a walk, or whatever it is that you do. So working with trauma, this is trauma. It is not an easy process, but we don't have to be really frightened of it either. Like, it's the Pandora's box or the can of worms kind of fear that people have, that once they start peeling back these wounds, that it's all going to be way too overwhelming. And yes, it will probably feel like it's going to be that, but again, another analogy, I think they're really helpful, these analogies. Babette Rothschild's, who I'll also maybe make a note of down below for you guys. She writes a wonderful book on trauma recovery called The 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery. Hopefully I've got that right. It's a fantastic, easy to read kind of guide to the different ways to work with trauma. And I think it might be her, I could be wrong, but oh well, we'll give her credit anyway because she's fabulous and I do recommend that book. But the analogy I think that she uses is the Coke bottle. So you imagine like a soft drink bottle, that's your trauma and it's all shook up, right? So of course with a soft drink bottle that's been shaken, when you open the lid, if you open it too quickly, what happens? It explodes everywhere and it's really overwhelming. So the idea is to just open that lid real slow, just one little turn at a time, and just let some of the steam or the whatever, the bubbles out slowly. So it's the same idea with trauma. You just want to let a little bit out at a time. Now, it's kind of like a bit hypocritical of me to say that in some ways, because some of our personalities will be such that we will go gung-ho when we're faced with a challenge and we'll just want to do it all now. So I do understand that impulse as well, because if you're really deep in distress with all of this, if you feel like this is disabling your life, you're in and out of hospital, or you can't function, or you're so distressed and in pain all the time, you might really want to dive deep and delve. And I was kind of in that category. I actually had recommended by my doctors not to do trauma therapy at the time that I started it, but I did it anyway because I just, I've got that kind of personality. Like once I've decided I want to learn or study or achieve something, I go at it 110%. So I'm not going to tell you what to do. You'll work out what you need to do, but I'm just saying that there are, there are different ways to do it, basically. And even in that book, 8 Keys to Safe Trauma Recovery, Babette explains that, we don't all have to do it this way. We don't all have to go delving into the, the memories maybe that are associated with these little parts. There are other ways to do it. So I encourage you to explore those other ways if this isn't feeling right for you. It's always about what's feeling right for you at any time. Sometimes for some of us, we just have to put the stuff on the shelf for many, many years even, while we get on with life, while we raise children or focus on our career, or, we're not ready. So again, this is only something you can answer. Am I ready for this? Do I want to do this work? And if you feel the answer's yes, then would be fabulous to surround yourself with some support network that know that you're doing this work, that you can debrief with, that you can show some of this journal material to. It's really fascinating work as well. Like, I think you know, if you have a buddy with you, you can kind of get excited about it together. I know, like, every time I would do a drawing for my psychologist, she would be, oh, can I photocopy that? You know, she'd want to, and I was like a little kid, like mum's putting my picture on the fridge, you know, and it was really nice to have someone excited for me. So yeah, journaling is a really great way. Artwork works well for kids as well, for little ones, parts that you identify as being children. I have done a lot of art and just got the steam out of a lot of difficult emotions, because if they're children parts, they will be speaking the language of children. You know, it's not always a language that you can use logic with and kind of argue with their reasoning. Sometimes it just needs to be felt. So, you know, again, when a child comes with a strong emotion, you know, we can't talk them out of that. This is the beauty of children. They just feel what they feel. And if they haven't been punished for that and they're allowed to express their emotions freely, what will happen is, you know, they'll just cry and cry and cry until all the tears are out, and then there'll be smiles and rainbows afterwards. So you kind of, you know, work with your inner children exactly as you would with real children. It's the same thing. You know, their energy is at that level. Like they work in emotions. They're very strong with emotions. They like imagery, and a lot of it's pre-verbal. A lot of it isn't. You know, you can't even put it into words. It's more about feeling, and sometimes imagery as well will help with that. Will trigger memory and trigger feeling. So I did a lot. I'll show you just a couple of things that I've done over time to give you an idea of what I mean. Okay, so I've got, so this one here. So this one here is expressing when a 12-year-old part came out in while I was staying at hospital, and it's interesting what she was writing here: trapped, stuck, wanting to die, hating this place, no one to help, and alone. So that is literally how I felt in the hospital. But what's interesting about this is that it helped me to understand how she was feeling, because when I was 12, I had just immigrated to a new country, and we were living in this new country, and I really hated it. So Laura, she's my 12-year-old part, she named herself as liking that name, was the isolated aspect of self, which didn't feel safe to share these feelings when I immigrated. So I was about 11, 12 when I immigrated, and there's a lot of pain in there, but it was very dissociated. So I, Louisa, the main aspect of myself, remember just kind of getting on with things, and that was how my whole family dealt with the immigration. But meanwhile, there was a whole lot of trauma that came with that move, loss, grief, you know. It astounds me now, knowing what I do about mental health, that, you know, it was never considered, it was never talked about, that immigrating like that would cause so much grief, and the whole family was affected by this grief. So it wasn't just me, of course, it was my parents who probably were grieving more than I was. Children are a little bit, you know, maybe more resilient, I'm not too sure, but that stage in my life was right on the, you know, cusp of puberty, trying to fit in, trying to find my identity, and yeah, it was a huge trauma for me. So this drawing slash journaling art, you know, is a really great clue as to why this part came about, and the feelings that were still lodged somewhere inside me that I now had to work with and resolve, to integrate. And I will get to integration very soon. The other one I wanted to show you guys was this one here, and it's it's not necessary to read all of it, but I guess I just like it because, you know, this is the 12-year-old anger, you know, and she really, I did a lot of really angry art in this state of consciousness, which was Laura's consciousness, and, you know, she's just venting in this about, you know, nobody caring for her, and how it's all it's all awful, and it's definitely got the 12-year-old energy of black and white thinking, that it's all terrible, no one likes me. So I've been to this place so many times, into this consciousness of Laura. And I have got so much art I could show you guys, but most of it, unfortunately, is really triggering, because Laura was the part that liked to self-harm. When I say liked, that's maybe the wrong word, but used self-harm, used cutting to express this pain. And so a lot of the art is quite graphic, and would be maybe a bit too triggering, but I think you get the point, right? That when I allowed this part expression, I started to really tap into how upset, angry, distressed, alone, all these feelings that she felt, and then I could work with that. So that was really great. And when I say great, like it's great at the end, but like I said before, it's tough when you're doing it, because I didn't at first trust this energy. Let's just take Laura, right? There was some other parts as well, but we'll just talk about Laura. Didn't trust this energy and didn't trust this process. And that's probably how most people would feel going through this. It's not like you just encounter these aspects that are holding these really negative emotions and go, oh, wonderful, it's so lovely to have you in my conscious awareness. It's more like, oh my God, like they're carrying so much pain. And I don't want to feel this pain, so it would be much easier to just shut the door on that room, shut Laura back in her room, keep her where she's been for so long. But we made friends, Laura and I, and I as I let her out more and more, she actually went through a period where she became very active in my life. So she ended up having like a playlist of songs which she liked. It was more like teenage music that I probably wouldn't want to listen to that much normally, but angry, energetic songs. There was also a time when, this is another tool you can use, there are forums for, if you identify with the DID diagnosis, or perhaps with borderline too, you might find one. I used one which was a DID forum, which is coping with DID. Really excellent forum, really well moderated, and that gave me a chance to let the parts speak in their own voices. So for example, there's an area there in the forum where you can go, I think it's called the playground, or so the little ones can go and kind of hang out together and meet other parts that are younger. And it's all a bit weird if you don't have the DID diagnosis, I suppose. And I found it pretty weird to start with. I thought, well, if I start, posting messages as this 12-year-old aspect, where is that going to go? It kind of freaked me out a bit. But I have to say it was really healing for Laura, because on that forum she made friends with other people/parts out there in the world, and it was done in a safe way, and she could express herself. And she didn't make friends when I was actually 12. That part was so isolated that she didn't have any friendships. So what I started to notice was she was growing and changing, and she was becoming happier. And these aspects are not static. Like, they're not, it's not Laura the part that, feels trapped and alone and wants to die. She was very suicidal. That was the other aspect of her. It's not like she'll be like that all the time. This is 12-year-old energy that is kind of trapped and stuck. But once you start to shift it, when you do this work, that energy will change as well. So how that appeared to me was that Laura was, just kind of having fun. Like, you would take me, I'd go on trips around the city, and I'd see life through that 12-year-old vision, that 12-year-old perspective. Magical, a city to a 12-year-old is a magical place. A city to a 38-year-old is maybe a bit dreary. It's where you work, and I don't know, lots of times you don't see the magic. But to a 12-year-old, it's fascinating. So, I started to find that this energy was coming into my awareness, and we were sharing it. even though I would have said that I was Laura at that time, you know, there was always a part of me that was aware of what was going on, so I could share it with her. And that's how integration starts to happen, is when you start to share, to integrate all of your experiences, and you kind of become one being. It's like you're many beings within one being that share a consciousness. This is a beautiful path of healing, and when you're starting to get to this stage, the whole thing can start to shift from being really awful and painful to quite fascinating and magical. Again, I think you need to, you know, if this is a small aspect of your life and it's just something you work on now and then in your journals, then you probably wouldn't need lots of support. But if you have been seriously sidelined by this stuff, you know, like I said before, you can't work and it's majorly affecting your life, and causing all sorts of problems for you, like addictions or self-harm or whatever it looks like, depression, anxiety, then you know, it pays to have that support and people around you that understand and can learn this language, can speak the language of the parts, and can relate to, you know, the aspects. So schema therapy is a good one. I know they work with, I don't know if they name the parts, like I would name my part Laura, but they would call the parts angry child or vulnerable child, and then they have adult parts as well. They have the punitive parent and they have the healthy adult. And so they use these parts. It's kind of like they're separating out the aspects of the personality, so you can really see how you're functioning and see when you're switching into one mode to the next. I think they call them modes. You know, and it's all about creating awareness. And so initially when you're doing this stuff, it might feel like you're actually fragmenting more because you're becoming more aware of it, and like the horror of, you know, suddenly naming parts of yourself, giving them new names and having song playlists for them and alter identities online, and all these things can feel a little bit like I'm going more crazy than I was before. But it will get to the point with all of that you can kind of I suppose what you're looking for with integration, the first step of integration would be when those parts are feeling validated and safe in your consciousness. So going back to the house analogy, that would be like the doors are now open, right? Laura's still got her bedroom. It's probably up in the attic. I think that's where she likes to hang out. But she can come up and down those stairs and interact with me whenever she wants. This is her home now. So your mind becomes a home for all of these parts. And that at that point, because you've obviously got to a point of validation of these parts by that stage, that's when you can start integrating. So I'm not going to talk about integration just yet, because I just wanted to cover one more little journal entry that I wanted to show you guys. So this is a little letter that my youngest part, who's 5, wrote to my doctor, and I wanted to read this out to, I suppose, express the incredible vulnerability and beauty of this process. I'm hoping that this letter will touch you as much as it touched me when I wrote it. To my doctor. I wish you could have come and helped me when we lived in the scary town in the scary house. You could knock on our door and meet my mommy and daddy and tell them that I wasn't well. And maybe you could come and talk to me in my bedroom, and I could show you my toys and my cats. If you could come to my house, I would hug you, even though you are a doctor. I am scared. Please don't leave me. Rose. I've got literally hundreds of these letters and journal entries and pieces of art. When I allow the parts to talk so honestly about their little world. Like Rose is 5, you know, and there's things in here that she wants and needs. You know, she wants and needs a protector. She wants and needs that someone would know she wasn't well. Because my parents couldn't play that role. The nature of dissociation and attachment trauma is that these parts go underground in the psyche. They aren't visible necessarily. So by the time you get to a 5-year-old, you know, you've morphed into this good little girl, the good little girl that mum and dad want to see, but other parts might be deeply repressed. So they can't be contacted at that point. And it's like, you know, I kind of, even though so much of me wishes that my parents could have met those needs, I can see how they wouldn't have even been aware of them. They wouldn't have been able to because they wouldn't have been aware of them. And they wouldn't have necessarily have had the tools themselves to do that. So, yeah, that's adult logic speaking. So adult logic then meets child needs, which are, you know, I'm scared, please don't leave me. The sense of being so alone and so abandoned. The innocence and the vulnerability. And, you know, the most beautiful thing about vulnerability is it is a doorway to intimacy with others and with the self. And even though this letter was written to my doctor, whom this little part is seeking intimacy with, closeness, trust, me witnessing this is also me becoming intimate with this part. So it's very powerful for you to witness how much pain these little parts were in. And then there's also the clue, you know, about I wish you could have come and helped me when we lived in the scary town and the scary house. So there again, there was another move in my life that was really upsetting to Rose, which is the name of the 5-year-old part. So that's material that I can work with, you know. I can ask Rose questions about it. I can get her to draw a picture of that place. There's also some really great NLP, neuro-linguistic programming techniques that I've used over time. Things like reliving memories on a television screen. So you close your eyes and you imagine the memory, but you imagine it on a television screen with like a crackly kind of old style look to it. So what you're doing is you're telling your mind that this happened in the past and is no longer happening. So with a lot of trauma reactions, and this is why we dissociate into these parts and we feel the emotions so strongly, it's because it's basically like a flashback. It's like a memory flashback. We're actually stepping back into that time and we're feeling it, so we can help remind ourselves that it's past now and we're safe. We can change those memories. John Bradshaw in Healing the Shame That Binds You, I will make a note to put that in the link as well. So he writes about a lot of this inner child work, and gives a great technique there to imagine the memory that's causing distress for this aspect, and to change it using visualization, using your imagination. It's actually really powerful. I know it sounds like maybe to logical brain, well, it's only your imagination and it's not real, but you know, I think as John probably explains in that book, visualization is really powerful. Like it literally rewires your brain. It's almost as if you are doing it. There's lots of studies about this that show, you know, people who visualize winning an Olympic event or playing a piano concerto, the sheer visualization is as powerful, or maybe just nearly as powerful, as actually practicing the piano or actually running. So yeah, anyway, I don't know the science on it necessarily. I've read bits and pieces here and there that it's kind of proven. So if you're interested in the evidence base, do go and have a look at neuro-linguistic programming. It's really powerful. I just played around with all of this stuff. You know, I picked bits and pieces that felt like they might be helpful, and they really were very powerful, that particular one, of going back and changing the memories, especially the really triggering memories, the memories which I guess, crystallized the sense of helplessness or gave you the message that you weren't good enough on some level. So yeah, again, this could be very triggering work for you if those memories are big memories involving big trauma. And I, encourage you to do this work with support to get through this, because knowing that there'll definitely be, there's the trigger of the memory, and then there's the after effects, or how it will impact your life day to day as you're working through this stuff. My therapist insisted that I was on a low dose of medication for about 2 years that I worked with her, because I really found this stuff very hard to ground myself afterwards, to manage. She would call it flooding with emotion. I would flood with these distressing emotions. So, if you find yourself getting really distressed, then again, work out ways that you can kind of contain it and keep it safe. So that was my little letter. There's the neuro-linguistic programming. There's also visualization you can do. So for a number of years, I worked with what's called the safe house visualization. There's probably lots of different, versions of this floating around in psychology and online, and you can have a sort of look it up, maybe visualization techniques for safety or something like that. If I find any resources, I'll put them up on my website for you guys. But essentially what you're doing, and you can basically make it up if you're a creative person and you're happy to do it on your own, is you're creating a safe place in your mind to go to, visualizing it. And it's really important that you make it really safe. So you want to, perhaps put in some security fencing or security system. It can be magical. Your security system might be, I don't know, little elves with magic spells, or I had trees surrounding my whole property that were interlocked. All the branches were like interlocked, so nobody could get in. And this safe place, any landscape you want, any type of house you want, you really can go to town with it and have a lot of fun and creating this beautiful place for yourself. And the one that I worked with, I had like a bedroom for each inner child or inner aspect. And I would go and visit them there in my imagination, and I would have a chat with them, and I would see how they were going. And it wasn't always pretty, believe me, like especially the little boy that I mentioned before. There was a sort of 8-year-old boy who was very, very angry. So I would visit the 8-year-old boy in my mind, in my safe house, and get things thrown at me. So yeah, and there was quite a lot of violence coming from him, but that's okay. I laugh about it now because, because it's over. I've done that work. I know it is very hard. I know this stuff is hard. When I was going into those safe houses and getting things thrown at me by my little inner boy, I questioned it constantly. Is this the right thing to be doing? Can I handle this? And the reason for that is that the adult self of me was feeling so insecure and inept, at doing this. So there's no doubt it's difficult, but like I have said a few times, persevering and trying little things to see what works for you, what feels good for you. There's some beautiful meditation that was taught to me by the lady that taught me the safe house, the lovely Beverly Searles. I must thank her very much for teaching me this technique. So it's to put the little ones in a healing shower. So you can kind of imagine them lying under a beautiful pool of light with hearts falling down, or rainbows, or whatever. It's really a very personal thing. It's you can use different colors for this, or you can externalize all of this stuff. So you might not want to do it in your head so much. You might actually I went out and bought a whole lot of stuffed toys that I carried around for years. I still go there when I need them. These are the childish things that we don't always allow ourselves to have on hand, and we think we've outgrown them. But if we've got this kind of trauma, you can really pay to just respond to it as you would an adult treating a child. How would you speak to that part of yourself? You know, can you give yourself something really comforting, like a beautiful, warm, cozy blanket, or you know, I mean, things like cups of tea, those are all great as well, bubble baths. It depends on the age of the inner aspect, whether that's going to work. I always found with the children parts, they really literally needed childish things, like a box of crayons and a pad of drawing paper, or, you know, I bought a number of children's books over the time that were soothing stories that I would read to myself. You can have people read out loud to you. You can listen to like lullaby music or beautiful music. Just channel your inner parent. If you don't already have kids, you've still got an inner parent in there, because we all know instinctively how to treat little ones, right? It's an instinct. So you can cultivate that instinct. And if you do already have children, then fantastic. Hopefully you can draw on this as well. So yeah, that might be enough for this part, and then I'll have part 3 to talk about the integration, and this is going to go more into moving away from the childlike and the practical tools, the childlike aspects and the practical tools, moving more into, you know, where is this journey taking you? And it's more of a spiritual, I suppose, awakening that you can expect. A new way, if you want to, if you're not into so much spiritual things, you can just think of it as version 2 of yourself, the new chapter of you. What is that going to look like? What does it look like post working with the inner child, post healing from this? So we'll explore that in part 3. And, you know, the rewards, it's the good stuff. So hang in there with me if you can. And yeah, and I'll see you very soon. Okay.